It is known as reapportionment or redistricting, redrawing political districts. Hawaii's deadline to finish the new maps is fast approaching, and the changes in district boundaries could pit incumbents against each other in next year's elections or even create new districts. How much input does the public have? Join the discussion on reapportionment, why it matters. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Every 10 years after the census, states and counties redraw district lines to account for shifts in population. The Constitution requires each district to have as close to an equal number of voters as possible. Although equal representation is the goal, there is also an effort to keep neighborhoods together and respect natural geographic boundaries like mountains and islands. Sounds easy, but moving a boundary just a few blocks can split an established community and undermine political careers. When population shifts dramatically, as it has on Oahu, reapportionment becomes a major political battlefield. Early proposed maps have already provoked controversy and suspicions of unfair influence and ethnic discrimination. Members of the State Reapportionment Commission declined to appear tonight on our show. The project manager, David Rosenbrock, initially accepted our invitation, but then said he was unavailable. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email us or call us with your questions. We also encourage you to get involved with the conversation on our Facebook page. Now to our guests. Natalia Hussey-Burdick is part of the City and County of Honolulu's Reapportionment Commission. She also serves as the treasurer for the Young Progressives Demanding Action and she is the secretary of the Democratic Party of Hawaii. Sandy Ma is the executive director of Common Cause Hawaii, an organization dedicated to upholding the core values of American democracy. Steve Pavao from Hilo served as a member of the Hawaii County Reapportionment Commission in 2001 and is currently a member of the Hawaii Island Advisory Council to the State Reapportionment Commission. And Colin Moore, joining us remotely tonight, is an associate professor and director of the Public Policy Center at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He is also the author of American Imperialism and the State, 1893 to 1921. You know, we asked, does reapportionment matter? Sandy, it seems like it must matter because a lot of people are complaining. What are some of the conflicts that have arisen over this process at the city and county level and the state level here?
Well, we've heard a lot of complaints about gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, but the issue we care most about for Common Cause Hawaii is that the people's voice gets heard. The process should not be used to draw lines to benefit a political party, an incumbent, or to favor an individual. The process should be to ensure that the community is allowed to elect an individual that best represents the community. The process of redistricting is to make sure that the community gets heard, and so that is the foundation of our democracy. And so that is why redistricting is so important and people need to get involved. You know, we talk a lot about voting, but redistricting is what makes voting and electing officials to represent us possible.
You know, it's a tremendously important process, and it happens only once every 10 years, so people don't hear about it, they lose track. I heard some testimony from someone complaining about a district the other day who said, I didn't even know what this process was. Steve Pavao, you have a lot of experience with reapportionment commissions, both at the state level and at the Big Island. Do you think it's generally they try and handle it fairly here? How do they do it here in such a way that it doesn't get politically messed up? Do you think they've done a good job of setting up a system that should be as apolitical as possible?
I think that, by its very nature, because it involves politics, to remove politics from completely is virtually impossible. The way the Reapportionment Commission, for instance, is set up, the Senate President appoints one member, the House leader appoints one, then the Senate Minority Leader, the House Minority Leader. So it's evenly based, basically Republican and Democrat. But in the end, there's always some political. Everybody comes to the table with some political agenda, one way or the other, whether it's conscious or subconscious. The good news is that that we don't have the kind of scale of gerrymandering that we see in states in the mainland. But there's always some level of that. And one party more than the other, I don't know if that's necessarily true. But there's always, I know from today's Reapportionment Commission and previous Reapportionment Commission meetings, the general public has been very upset about some districts, and there have been some out-and-out accusations about gerrymandering for sure. And can we ever remove that from the process? I don't know. When I was in the County Reapportionment Commission in 2001 on the Big Island, the mayor then did a very interesting thing. He made each council member give him names from their district, and more times than not, they all offered names from the political party they were in. So I think the process was fair.
Let me call in more. We throw the word gerrymandering around, and I think a lot of people, when they think of redistricting, that's the first word that pops into their head. But I don't think a lot of people actually understand it. Can you explain what it actually means, and explain how that in particular is abused, particularly on the mainland?
Sure. So gerrymandering is an old tradition in American politics. It goes back to the 19th century. And the idea, of course, is to try to draw districts that make it most likely that your party is going to do better than the other party. And you can do that in a few ways. And it goes, there's some funny names that accompany this. And sometimes people call it stacking, cracking, and even kidnapping. So stacking is when you try to put as many people who support one party into one district, so everyone is together. And so in theory, that means you can elect your party members in the other district. Cracking is when you try to take, for example, a city and split it up among multiple districts. This is often a tactic Republicans use in cities in the mainland. So you spread out those Democratic voters out to the suburbs. And kidnapping, which we actually see a fair bit in Hawaii, I think, is when you draw an incumbent out of his or her own district, or you draw them into somebody else's district. So we don't have, I think, a whole lot of directly partisan gerrymandering here in Hawaii, partly because we have one party that's so dominant, partly because of the structure of our reapportionment committee. It on purpose balances the two parties. But what I do think you see a lot of, perhaps, if there's any mischief that goes on, it probably is to protect certain incumbents and to punish other incumbents.
Natalia Hussey-Burdick, with both the Democratic Party and on Honolulu Reapportionment Commission, how's it going with Honolulu? I think they just passed a map yesterday, but can you tell me how firm is that? How much more time is there for people to jump in, and what kind of conflicts have you started to see there?
Yeah, so that's right. We actually finished our process a few months early. We also had a January 2nd deadline, but we had a very streamlined process where we had our staff propose the maps, which is the main difference, I think, between the state level and the council level is that we had the staff draw the line, so there's not so much political partisan maneuvering there. And then we heard testimony from the public, and then we revised that map based on the testimony from the public, and it did pass on Tuesday in a 7-2 vote. That map is now finalized, and we're working on our final report, which should be coming out in the next month or two.
Tell me what are some of the big changes that are happening then on Oahu? I know, as I mentioned in the introduction, the population has shifted very dramatically in Oahu from the east side to the west side. And we have some maps, I don't know if we can show them. These are going to be legislative maps, not council maps, but they show how much population has gone up in the west side and how it's been suppressed on the east side. How did that affect what happened with the city and county maps?
So that's another main difference between the city and council redistricting map and the state, is that the city and council charter does not require us to extract our non-permanent residents. So we didn't. And so a lot of our boundaries stayed largely the same. The Windward district is entirely exactly the same as it was before. The main change, I would say, with the new map is that it changed the Kalihi districts to be a more Ahupua'a-style mountain to ocean, running parallel to all the other districts, whereas before they had been kind of perpendicular in a strange way.
It was sort of like, the line was like the highway or something, right? So what impact will that have on the people who actually live in those districts?
So a lot of people supported this change because as we go further into the post-climate change world, we need representatives who are going to be focused on the issues from the mountain to the ocean. We need them all eyes on the shoreline because there's massive erosion. We also need all eyes on the watershed that goes into the ocean. So I think it's just a really more holistic way to look at the map and to get everybody's cooperation.
Sandy Bao, so the other big issue that comes up more in Hawaii, what has been the reaction of, say, the Native Hawaiian or other ethnic communities to what's happening at the state level?
So the state had released its draft maps prepared by the technical group, which is a subset of the entire Reapportionment Commission recently. And the technical group, when it drafted its map, had done a couple of interesting things based on the population shift on Oahu from the east to the west. There's been tremendous growth on the west side. So one of the interesting things was the proposed new district, HD House District 51. For House District 51, it combined basically like the Kailua area with the Waimanalo area, which is what it currently is now with the Portlock area. So it basically sandwiched a really distinct Native Hawaiian area of Waimanalo in between a really affluent areas of Kailua and Portlock. And so the Native Hawaiian community is concerned that their distinct community of interest will be drowned out by these two very affluent areas. And so rightfully so, I would say. And so they have testified forcefully against the proposed District 51, House District 51. And also another interesting thing that was done by this new map released by the Reapportionment Commission is a proposed House District 20. And I think proposed House District 24, Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, they split Manoa in half, and which is also very interesting, splitting Manoa in half. And Manoa is a distinct community, has unique needs, and they split it in half. And it's not very clear why. There's been a lot of testimony today at the Redistricting Commission about why Manoa was split in half. So,
let me ask Steve about how does that happen technically? Like, for example, I live in Makakilo, and my district got split in half 10 years ago, and my representative lives in another neighborhood. What's the technical process that you go through, and then what's the political or policy process you go through to fix what the technical process generated?
It is a challenging process. I know in 2001, when I was in the county's Reapportionment Commission, same process. Of course, we didn't have the same technology back in 2001, but working with the election office staff, you basically look at the disparity you have in the percentage, and this district has too many, and the next district has too little. You have to move the boundaries, and the boundaries, your limit is you have to move by census blocks, not by census tracts, but by census blocks. So if you move one census block, all of a sudden, wow, maybe now we got too many, and then when you move this census block, the next district over now, the domino effect has too little. So I agree that the Waimanalo thing doesn't make sense to me. It kind of goes against the very rules that the Reapportionment Commission has itself in creating compact contiguous districts to the extent possible. And they also had a sort of an unwritten understanding that you wouldn't create districts that were separated by mountain ranges like the Ko'olaus. Waimanalo and Portlock, in my mind, are completely separated. And the communities are so different. I mean, Kailua and Waimanalo probably are not exactly the same, but they're more alike in Kaneohe than Portlock would be, and they're all on the same side of the Ko'olaus.
Let me ask Colin more. The people who are absolutely the most interested in this are the incumbents, the people who are in office, and some of them seem to think that they have a right to that office regardless of what happens. I have a right to be in this office regardless if there's not enough voters here to elect a person. What happens there in terms of the incumbent? What starts to happen when reapportionment comes out? What are some of the things the incumbents are watching for?
Well, of course, they're most interested in if they're still living in the district they thought they represented. That can create a real problem. We saw a number of cases in these proposed maps where incumbents no longer live in their district. Adrian Tam, for example, represents Waikiki. He doesn't live in the current district that he's supposed to represent. So that's a real problem. And it's also a problem because the one thing incumbents never want to do is run against another incumbent. And that means they would be forced into that situation. You also have a situation, which is what happened in District 19, which is Waiʻi, Kahala. This is Bert Kobayashi's district. That really was the district, I think, that was more or less removed to create a new district on the west side, which means that old District 19 now is split into a bunch of other East Oahu districts, which is why you get these really odd shapes with those East Oahu districts that now used to be pretty compact. For example, Sandy mentioned Manoa. Actually, I always thought I lived in Manoa. Now my own house was drawn out of that district. Even I don't live there anymore as a result of these new lines. And this district now kind of extends down to capture District 19. So I think a lot of people are frustrated by that, but I'm sure nobody more than Representative Bert Kobayashi, who doesn't really have a district anymore.
I think he actually accused the commission of gerrymandering him away.
He did. He absolutely did.
And then, Natalia, in the city side, you say you didn't really have to move things too much, and you actually feel like you improved at least one district. But there was a controversy about people being moved into a district where, they may have voted 2 years ago or 4 years ago for their representative, and now they're now in a district that they're not going to have another chance to vote for a representative elsewhere. Why is it that after reapportionment, they just don't make everybody run for election in a particular district?
So that is a very curious question that all of the commissioners were wondering. Why does the charter outline it in that way so that we have staggered districts and not everybody has to run? So like on the state level, all of the state senators who similarly have 4-year terms, they are all up for re-election on reapportionment years. And so that was a big point of contention during our deliberations. And we ended up making a recommendation to the Charter Commission to work on that and to fix it for next time.
Mm-hmm.
So, because that's what I was remembering, is that in a reapportionment year, the whole Senate has to run for re-election, which I'm sure they hate. But, so Sandy, I got a question here, and then, this is getting pretty specific, but this is an issue brought up by Donna Sterling, a Hawaiian homesteader, who says the Moku in the, I think this is the North Shore of Maui, is split. Are you seeing neighbor islands? What kind of problems are we jumping into in the neighbor islands?
So for the neighbor islands, we haven't received that many complaints or concerns from neighbor islands. We did see for on the Big Island, Senate districts being redrawn so that Senators Inouye and Ocasio, if they remain and do not move where they are, will face each other in a primary election. And so I forget which districts that is. I think that's 1 and 4.
Senate 1 and 4.
1 and 4. But I want to go back to the issue that redistricting process is not for incumbents. It's not for a particular party. Redistricting is to redraw the lines to have equal representation for where people have moved in a state. And so it is for the people. It is for people to draw the lines so that people could be able to elect representatives of their choice. It is not for incumbents. It is not for incumbents to stay in office. So that is where Common Cause gets really irritated that elected officials believe that the redistricting process is for them, and it is not. It is for the people.
Steve Paval, as a member, though, you were appointed by whom when you were a member of the commission on the Big Island? The mayor, right?
When I was on the Reapportionment Commission for the Hawaii County by the mayor, now I'm on the Hawaii Island Advisory Commission appointed by the Senate President.
So the reason I asked that was when you're on a commission and you're appointed by a particular politician and you've done something to that politician's friend, do you get a call?
No, and actually the mayor at that time was Harry Kim back then. And when the mayor asked each council member from the district, so the council member from my district asked me if I was willing to serve. And as I said earlier, ironically, it ended up that all of the commissioners were the party of the same party that the council member in their district was, because that's the way the mayor asked the council members from each 9 districts to appoint. And the council members came to all the public hearings, they offered their testimony, but there was no conversation outside of the commission's meeting. Nobody called me, nobody asked me any favors of moving districts. They came to public hearings, they offered their opinions.
Natalia, let me ask you, did you get a sense that there was some of that going on?
Absolutely not. And so that was some of the allegations that were thrown around, more in the sense that a lot of the testifiers that we get are neighborhood board chairs and sophisticated political operatives. But the way I see it, almost every single one of these are volunteers. They're giving of their time and resources. They're pouring their hearts into these maps that they're making for their community. They're showing up. And that's what we need. Our democracy only works when everybody participates.
Colin, Sandy Ma brings up a very good point, is that, but there is a natural inclination to suspect something's up when you get gored by a process. A call from a caller, Peter in Hawaii, why was District 17 reduced so radically? Colin, you got an answer for that question? I don't know where 17 is, sorry.
17 is the Hawaii district that used to include Portlock, and now Portlock was added to 51. I don't know specifically why that was. I mean, I think the 1751 issue is a little strange, but politics, of course, is part of this process, whether we like it or not, and so I'm sure there's a story behind that. I mean, but it's not all political. I mean, I think what the other folks have said is exactly right. The numbers have to work out. The goal this time was to get about 28,000 people per House district. That can vary by about 10%. But that's a real challenge to draw these lines, especially when you're trying to move a whole district like they were all the way over to the west side, but try to keep some of the boundaries stable. I think that was a central challenge they were working with. But I also don't believe that politics had nothing to do with it. Everyone who was appointed by very savvy political folks, and I think that there certainly were some political decisions that went into this. I think far less than a lot of states on the mainland. I think overall our process has a lot of integrity, but it doesn't mean politics had nothing to do with it. I think particularly in those cases where you saw some suspicious actions where some incumbents were drawn together in the same district.
Let me just ask you this question, Colin. This gets a little bit more technical, but when you're trying to do this balancing act of getting a certain number of people in a district, and you come up with this thing, and then let's say that those voters there in Portlock, for example, if we get really specific, might be one of the lot more Republican parts of the city. So Hawaii Kai is one of the places one of the few places you've got a Republican legislator. Now, if I were him, I might be a little concerned about that. Is there an effort to, at least in a general term, keep a Republican voting area Republican, or at least not steal voters from that Republican incumbent, and vice versa with Democrats? Is that a consideration?
I think it's absolutely a consideration for our commission, because it's balanced between Republicans and Democrats, and the Democratic Party, of course, rules the state, but the Republicans do have a little bit of power here. And one thing they would want to do, I'm sure, is to protect the Republican districts that they do have. And so in some ways, if you want to be very cynical, you can sort of call this an incumbency protection racket, that the idea is to really protect those incumbents who have stable districts. Now, that's an exaggeration. I don't mean to go that far, but I think a cynic might have that perspective.
You may be saying you're exaggerating, but when you said it, Steve Pavao looked at me and went.
No, I think there's some of that exactly going on. I mean, I think it's a good example what Sandy was talking about earlier about the Senate districts. The Big Island, this is part of the lawsuit that we had 10 years ago when we went to the state Supreme Court, was for the military to be extracted to the real number that should be extracted, so that in turn the Big Island would end up with a 4th Senate seat. So what happened now is that because of the growth in West Hawaii, that that 1st Senate district encompasses more of North Kona and less of North Hilo. So what ends up happening now is you created a district that has a significant amount of Republican votes in Kona, Waimea, Waikoloa, and guess what? It has no incumbent now, because by doing that, they forced the 2 Democratic incumbents into 1 district in Hilo. So that, to me, you could sense that maybe that some of that was motivated politically.
You know, Natalia, the city county is nonpartisan. The commission chair was a Republican. And did you see partisan issues creeping in, or how do you feel about that process?
So I'm glad you asked, because I did want to clarify. The previous question that you asked me, I can only attest to on the Honolulu City Council level. We did not make any permitted interaction groups, so all the discussions happened in broad daylight of the Sunshine Law, with public input and testimony. The state level, though, has permitted interaction groups. And on the county level...
Well, let me describe what that is.
Oh, so a permitted interaction group is when you have to abide by the Sunshine Law, you're not allowed to talk to any other commissioners behind closed doors. It has to be at a public hearing where the public can weigh in on it, and it's on an agenda.
I'm sure they never do.
So if you have to abide by the Sunshine Law, you're allowed to make permitted interaction groups where you can have these detailed conversations and get into the weeds in private, and then come and show the public what you've done. And so we didn't have any of those on the council level. We didn't know where any of the incumbents lived. And so I will say it does raise questions when on the state level, they do know where the incumbents live, and they are making these decisions behind closed doors.
How could you not know where the incumbents live? I'm just curious. How did you wall yourself off from that?
We don't know their addresses. We know, like, you know, the one lives on the windward side and one lives in the North Shore, but we don't know, when we draw the lines, we don't know where they live.
Colin, what do you think about that? I mean, I'm frankly kind of surprised, and I don't mean to suggest you might be naive or something, but I'm just wondering, you know, from my experience in occasionally covering reapportionment, what happens is you draw these lines, and the first people that are affected and the most sensitive are the incumbent politicians, and you know, the commissioners at the state level are appointed by politicians, and you know, I know you said it's an incumbent protection plan, but is it more of a, do you see it being used in order as a hammer as well as a almost like an accidental process?
Oh, I think it can be. I mean, not all incumbents deserve protection, I think. I mean, or at least according to the folks who are appointing these members. And I think you saw some incumbents who, whether it was on purpose or not, I mean, I can't say, but clearly were punished. You know, the city and county districts, I think, really are actually very beautiful and fair. And that in part is because they're much bigger. I mean, it's a little bit easier to draw just those big districts. You don't have to make as many tough decisions. But I thought they did a spectacular job. I don't really see as much political influence there as I see potentially in the State House districts.
But let me ask, though, just to be more specific, how would a sitting politician punish someone through the reapportionment process?
The easiest way is to draw two incumbents into the same district, maybe just extend the district lines just a little bit so they're in somebody else's district. What does this mean? It means all of a sudden they're competing against an incumbent who has most of his or her traditional district. And so it's like they're a challenger. The people in that district are not going to know who they are, and they're running against an incumbent. So it makes it very difficult for them to win re-election. I mean, they either have to move, which isn't always that easy, or to face an incumbent. So I think if you were trying to punish someone, the way you would do it is to draw them just a little bit so they don't capture much of their old district, but into the new district so they'd be forced to run against an incumbent.
But Steve Pavao, physically or mathematically, you mentioned that you have to work with census districts. It's not like you could just say, oh, well, let's move this line a block. it's larger than that, right? How big is a census block?
Census blocks are not that big. They're not. We think of census tracts as a large tract of land. Census blocks are pretty small. They vary in the number of homes in each census tract. I mean, each census block. But you have to move block at a time. You cannot split blocks. You have to move an entire block. So I mean, what Colin is saying is true, though, and I've seen it happen in the past in reapportionment where people have done that. I mean, as I said earlier, it's happening now in the Big Island Senate District 1 and 4, where the lines have been moved enough that the two senators in the two different districts are now in one district, and you've created a new open district with no incumbent.
Sandy Ma, I know you said very clearly and very strongly that this is not about the incumbents. This is about giving the public access as a group, giving neighborhoods the opportunity to find someone that fits their represents them.
Correct.
Where in that area do you think there's problems with the maps that we've heard about? Like I heard a story I read somewhere that there was a housing area, a public housing, it's a big public housing area, public housing project. I know that no one likes to call it projects, but you got broken into 3 pieces and put in 3 separate districts. Is that true? And what's the effect of that?
So we were told that Kamehameha Homes, a large, public housing, is split along 3 districts, house districts, 26, 27, and 29. We all know public housing has unique needs. They have unique educational needs, unique public transportation, unique health needs, and we've recently been informed people in public housing do not have broadband access yet. And so they can't even participate in these redistricting, reapportionment discussions because everything is on Zoom. So how can they even access to voice their concerns?
Let me just ask this way, though. From a physical standpoint, what happens to the voice of a neighborhood like that when it's broken into 3 separate districts?
So how are they going to organize to make their concerns heard if they have to go and lobby different legislators, different representatives to try to get their community's concerns solved? It's hard enough to live day to day, but how are they going to go find 3 different representatives to say this is what we need? They're just going to possibly get shunted off to 3 different representatives.
Let me, Natalia, in terms of, this is more from your place as working in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. When you see something like that, I imagine you're seeing it also from a practical point of view. That is, if you're broken up into 3 different districts, you're not going to be a lot of voters in any one of those districts. So you'll be underrepresented in 3 districts instead of solidly represented in a single district. Is that the concern?
Absolutely. And since you brought up the partisan progressive nature, it is notable that of all the incumbents who have been paired together, almost every single one of them are members of the Progressive Caucus in the legislature.
Keep going with that. Who are you talking about?
So there's it's an officially formed caucus in the legislature. We've got the Women's Caucus, the Hawaiian Caucus, Filipino Caucus, and recently formed Progressive Caucus last year. And so just noticing the pattern of, I think it was 10 incumbents who have been paired together, I think 9 of them are members of the Progressive Caucus.
So you're not saying this out loud, but what you're saying is the math would indicate that if someone is manipulating the system, they're trying to reduce the progressive voice in the legislature.
One might infer these things based on the fact that these discussions are not happening out in the front. They're happening in permitted interaction groups, and what you see coming out of those groups have curious panhandles and questionable boundaries. They're not straight lines. They're not contiguous. They're not what the communities want. I think every single one of the state reapportionment testimonies that I heard today were in strong opposition to the proposed maps.
So, Colin, is there a benign explanation for that?
I think there could be a benign explanation for 1 or 2 cases. I think we see a few too many cases for it to be benign. So I think that there is clearly some effort to, given that they had to make some choices, when they made some of those choices, they clearly, I think, went after some of the incumbents who are not favored by the leadership. And I want to point out, since we're talking about this isn't the only way you can do this. There are states that do it differently. And one of my favorite examples actually comes from Iowa. And the way they do it in Iowa is they remove all of the political variables. So the staff, and it's a staff design system, isn't allowed to know where incumbents live. They're not allowed to know how many Republicans and Democrats are in each district. They're not politicians, so they're not necessarily paying attention to where incumbents live. And then they just draw the lines according to, we've used this term communities of interest, which is just a fancy way of saying, areas that seem to have, similar qualities, geographic boundaries. I mean, very similar, I think, to the spirit of how they drew the boundaries for the new city and county council district boundaries. So, there are other options out there. What we have right now is not the way it has to be. Of course, it's the way it's going to be this time. But, we have another decade to think about some possible changes here. And, there might be better ways to do it, better ways to create our Reapportionment Commission than the one we have now.
I just want to clarify really quick. Sorry, since you
Sorry.
a little
Since
bit
I
put
put you
words
on
in
the
my
spot.
mouth.
Okay.
I'm in no way making accusations. I'm repeating observations that I noticed in testimony today. And so if that is indeed not the case, then the commissioners need to come forward and explain why they drew the lines this way.
Okay.
And Steve had said this earlier. This is just the start to the state reapportionment process. The maps are going out for public hearing. Public hearings will be for a 2-week process. It's not starting at a great time. It's starting Thanksgiving week, and it goes for 2 weeks, about 2 weeks from Thanksgiving week. So everyone who has problems with these maps should say something, because now is the time that you can really affect a change in these maps. It's not a done deal.
Today I was watching, very briefly, I didn't have a lot of time, I was watching the State Reapportionment Commission meeting, and a fellow came on and he said that he was talking specifically, he's from Kailua, talking specifically about the relationship between Kailua and Shannon Lakes, Waimanalo, Portlock, and he said, so I did a map where I put the district at the line at Makapu, and I ignored all the politics, and I tried to make them aha-puaha pie-shaped districts, and it worked out just fine. And I'm going, how the heck did he do that, right? It's like, so you're saying that there's actually, Steve, a way that the public could actually go in and draw their own maps?
Yeah, there's a state-of-the-art app online, and there's actually tutorials, video to instruct you how to do it, and they've encouraged the general public to do it. What Sandy was saying is true, is that this is the beginning of the process. The best way to offer change is not just testimony, but create a map. Show them a real map that you think works better. If you're going to create a map like what you're saying with Waimanalo, then you're going to have to create a map that's going to involve the entire island. Because I know one of the Reapportionment commissioners said, if you remove Portlock from that district, then you're going to have to eventually probably put Wailua with Wahiawa. But to me, Wailua with Wahiawa makes more sense than Portlock with Waimanalo. But because it creates a domino process. If you move the district lines, you move census blocks, then it affects the next district. You're going to keep on going until you get it resolved.
Well, it just strikes me as being the most transparent and public-spirited. I mean, like what you're saying, Sandy, people can really get into this. I mean, I could see myself up to 2 a.m. manipulating districts. I mean, I'm that much of a geek. But, I mean, are you happy with the system, the Zoom? I know you're not happy that people can't go down physically, but in terms of the amount of input that's happening this time, is it like it was before? I had one question from someone saying, how was it different this time than it was 10 years ago?
We were told that there were more testimonies, written and oral, at this public hearing today than there were 10 years ago, like more public participation this time around than they've seen last time around. So yes, we're happy people are involved. We're happy that people know this is going on. We're happy that people are submitting maps. Common Cause has done a training with the state Reapportionment Commission staff on how to use the mapping tool. So yes, we're happy. We want people to submit their own maps.
I kind of wonder, and I'll just throw this out, Natalia or Colin in particular, I think that this year also there's been more coverage of the national gerrymandering issue, particularly as it relates to people of color. And there's lots of reporting about, I think it was Texas, where they basically just blatantly went and chopped up districts where minority voters were dominant. And do you think that there's sort of a realization out there that this districting is a national issue that you need to affect locally?
Absolutely. I mean, this has received a lot of press coverage over the last 10 years. I mean, the idea of political redistricting has been controversial. Of course, it's perfectly legal in most states to draw boundaries to try to favor one political party, and that's the Texas example you're getting at. We didn't even talk about our two congressional districts, where they've more or less remained the same with a very, very small change. But in a lot of states, in big states like Texas that have a lot of congressional districts and that are controlled and drawn by the majority political party, there are a lot of concerns with trying to dilute minority votes or trying to dilute votes of the opposition party. And I think as a result of all the coverage, people understand the importance of this far more than they used to. The other thing I'd point out is that part of this is due to the technology. It used to be a lot more difficult to do this, but the computer programs are so sophisticated, that the way it's done in very partisan states, you can see, how many Republicans district live in each census block and start drawing the districts to try to maximize the probability that a certain party is going to win. So if you're trying to do it that way, you have a lot of very sophisticated statistical algorithms to help you out.
Natalia, comment on that a little bit. Do you feel like people are just more aware of how redistricting has been used to suppress black votes in particular across the country? It's part of a strategy of voter suppression that's been going on ever since they were allowed to vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so let me just start by saying that my expertise is mostly on a local level, but I do think the same sentiments are echoed nationwide for decades. What I do want to say, though, is it's been really hard to get people to even know that this is going on. I know that Common Cause has put in a lot of effort into promoting this and getting people involved. And I just want to emphasize that if you have the ability to go online and create a map, we really wish we could have had that on the council level. We only had 2 software licenses. We use the same software. We only had 2 software licenses on the council level, so that's why we commissioners couldn't make our own maps. But on the state level, the commissioners can make their maps, the public can make the maps, they have unlimited licenses, so really take advantage of this software. And I would love it if PBS could link to that in the videos, and if not, I will comment underneath the videos shortly after this and give you a link to the software.
I just Google Hawaii Reapportionment Commission.
And that's kind of what you have to do, because unfortunately the URL is really long, and I can't just like spit it out really easily for you guys to remember at home, but we will link to that in the comments if you're watching on Facebook.
If you go to the State of Hawaii Elections Office, the links are all there, the reapportionment, and then it breaks down into the maps and the mapping technology and all of that.
Was there a lot of money, Steve, put into the state effort this year? I mean, more money than in the past, or is this just a matter of technology improving so much?
No, I don't know. I don't know how big their budget is. Is there more money in the budget? I don't think so. I mean, I know that they spent money on this technology, which is a good thing. It's evolved. It's much more user friendly, and it's good that it's open to the public. The unfortunate thing about it is that, as we've been talking about, is it hasn't been well publicized. Much of the public don't know about it. Even these meetings, you have to be savvy. You have to go to the website. The Sunshine Law has very specific timelines as far as announcing public meetings, but they're all buried in a website. You have to know to go to the website to see those announcements, see the agendas, see the Zoom links. So if it was publicized more, I think it would be better. I think people have to know and appreciate how important this is, reapportionment. It's based in our Constitution that there's one person, one vote, that we all have equal representation. So that's the whole purpose of doing it, not to protect the incumbents, but that we all have equal voice, whether it's in the city level or the county level or the state level.
Sandy, did you want to say something about that?
Thank you, Steve, for that. That was wonderfully said. And there was a specific appropriation to support the Reapportionment Commission. I don't recall how much, but that was done in the 2021 legislative session.
Colin, do you think that this large amount of public participation is going to make a difference?
I hope it does. I mean, I think in the past they have adjusted the lines after public complaints. I think there's been a lot more of it, like we've said, than in the past. And I think that, particularly District 51, the Kailua Portlock district, and the Manoa district that we've mentioned that a lot of people find problematic. So it wouldn't surprise me if there is, if they do reconsider some of these districts. And I think it's great that people are pushing back. But it might be better also to think about how we could do this better in the future. How can we get to a place where, rather than trying to figure out how to sort of keep the map more or less stable to protect incumbents and work around the margins, we just start from a blank map of the island and go from there, and don't worry about who's in what district. Try to draw the fairest, most coherent districts that we can. And, actually, I think that's more or less what they did at the city and county level this time. And, I think they look great. They make a lot of sense.
Well, theoretically, you could use those districts as a base for the House districts. I mean, why would you? I mean, I'm sure you're going to have districts that cross lines because there's so many more House districts. But I mean, why can't you start with a map that just layers the different jurisdictions on top of each other? Why not?
Sure could. You could do it.
Okay.
We look forward to seeing your maps, Daryl, tomorrow.
Yeah, I've got a kitchen to renovate. Sorry, that sounded really cynical. I got three questions that are sort of technical, but also very interesting. One is, how does the census, Christina and Waipahu, how does the census affect the decisions the commission makes on redistricting? A mention about the military non-residents being extracted. I'm kind of curious. And then the third one was, what's the definition of permanent resident you're using? Susan from Hold On Now. Sandy, so who's in and who's out? We'll talk about the state first, because you mentioned that the military is included in your calculation, but at the state level, it's not, right? So who's in and who's out?
So the census forms the basis for the reapportionment and the redistricting. So that's why every 10 years, according to the federal constitution, we count everyone, whether you're a citizen or not, whether you are voting age or not. You could be a newborn baby. We count everyone as of April 1, Census Day. And so that forms the basis of reapportionment. So reapportionment is to reallocate the 435 U.S. House of Representatives seats across the 50 states. So that's reapportionment. Redistricting is then taking the census numbers and redrawing the state House of Representatives and county seats at the local level. If you have school board seats, that redraws those too. So that is why we take the census and then go to reapportionment and redistricting.
What's the logic, maybe Steve Pavao, since you were involved with this, what's the logic of excluding military?
Now, because the majority of the military that are here in Hawaii are not Hawaii residents. They claim residence in other states. That's where they're from. A lot of military, because they're mobile, claim Florida as their home state, even though they never lived there, because Florida has no income tax. So if they're not paying tax in Hawaii, they don't claim Hawaii as their resident. They're not included.
Can I just add, we're talking about it as if it's just the military, but it's also students and snowbirds and people who don't live here full time. And the reason that we do it is because the state constitution, Article 4, Section 4, mandates that we have to on the state level only. And that's why we didn't do it on the council level, because there was no mandate for the council.
We are the only state that doesn't count everyone. We're the only state that excludes non-permanent residents.
Do you think, Colin, that that's a specific slap at the military? That, even though a person who's registered in another state can't vote here, they deserve representation. They're using the facilities. They deserve to be heard. But if they're not counted in the reapportionment, they're not being heard the same way as other citizens.
I mean, that's really the philosophical question. And there's two arguments that I think are both reasonably coherent, that just because they're not residents, they're still using services in that district, and so they should count. I mean, a lot of this is due, I think, in part to a fight between Oahu and the neighbor islands, which is counting those military and non-resident students really benefits Oahu, because that's where nearly everybody was. In fact, I think, of the military and students who were extracted this time around, 95% were on Oahu. So there's that political debate too.
There's quite a lot, right? I mean, it's six figures in people, isn't it? I'm not sure.
Not this year. So this year was only 71,000.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I remember in the past it was high.
It was
Well, is
closer
that?
to 100,000 10 years ago.
Oh, it was. Wow, we've got that much less military and
That's
excluded
a question. That there's about 36,000 less, and I don't know if that's accurate or not. But
So can I just say that a lot of people think of it as if it's denying them a voice. That's absolutely not true. If they call their representative where they live, their representative is absolutely still going to be responsive to them. When you are doling out federal funding, it still counts in the census numbers. So we still dole out census funding for the schools and for the hospitals and everything in their district. What it essentially boils down to is when you're running for office and you have a big military base in your district, say Kailua, where I was born and raised, half of that district's population is in the military base where most of them don't vote and you can't go and campaign. So it essentially means that the election for that representative is significantly easier and puts them at a major advantage compared to other representatives who actually have to canvass their whole district.
That's interesting, but also from my experience dealing with politicians, they are vote counters. They want to know who's going to vote in their district, who's voting for them. They know what ethnic group votes for them, what ethnic group does not tend to vote for them. They tend to know what economic group votes for them and so on. They're incredibly sensitive to those things. And so to me, if you are not being counted by the redistricting, and as you say, maybe you've got a district where half the people are military, maybe easy to run in that district as an incumbent, but that's because you're really not reaching out into the military community to make the connections that will represent them. I mean, is that a fair thing to say, Colin?
Absolutely. I mean, this is why I said, that really comes down to your philosophy of representation. And we're unique because we decided to extract and exclude military and non-resident students. But as you said, you can spin an argument that says they're living there, they should, they should be included, they're using services. So it's really just a judgment call, and we've chosen uniquely to go a different way.
Sandy, go ahead.
Common Cause has also wanted to have incarcerated people counted at their home residence as of Census Day versus counted in the facility that they're incarcerated in, because that skews the population count, that skews the redistricting.
So right now, if you've got a prison in your district, you'll have a smaller district because you've got all these prisoners there.
Exactly, and it's counted in that district. You don't have to campaign there.
That's very interesting, Steve. Go ahead.
You were talking about military using services. So the federal government acknowledges that the military are not permanent residents because the state gets compensated every year millions of dollars for federal government because they're using our schools and using our facilities and not paying income tax in Hawaii. So I think that's the argument, is that they don't declare this as their permanent residence. They don't pay state income tax in this state. They pay it in their home state. So that's the logic of why they're removed. But I still question, and many of the testifiers in today's Reapportionment Commission and previous commission have questioned why there is such a significant decrease. Has the Department of Defense actually reported that there is that kind of decrease, that there's 30,000 less military over the last 10 years?
And it'd be interesting to see if it's showing up in housing prices. Colin, you mentioned Iowa, where they basically have a politics blind system. Natalia, you complimented positively about the way the city and county ran. Steve, if you could rewrite the system, how would you change it?
In some ways, what Colin was talking about, that makes sense. That you have a staff that is completely apolitical and have no knowledge of incumbents, and just look at the numbers, raw numbers, and try to create as compact and contiguous districts as possible with the intent of representation, one person, one vote. Maybe in some ways that is good, to remove politics completely from the process.
How different would it be, Sandy, if they did that?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, Common Cause has always championed a citizens reapportionment commission, having citizens knowledgeable in the process draw the maps.
How do you find them without getting politics involved?
Citizens sign up, put people first instead of politics first.
It is what they do in California, the largest state in the nation, actually. It's a bit of a complicated process, but citizens apply, and then their Their qualifications are reviewed, and then eventually a few are randomly selected, and then they select the other members of what is a pretty large commission. So it can be done, although that's a little bit of a complicated process, which in some ways why I think the Iowa system is a little cleaner.
You know, it sounds like a constitutional convention.
It's a little bit like that. I mean, it's a similar principle, which is that people, citizens know their communities. They should be the ones to draw the boundaries, and it's worked fairly well in California. I certainly wouldn't object if we tried it here.
You know, it's interesting too, is it that kind of, I was asking the resource question earlier, is that kind of resource put on an event like that would bring it to the public eye a lot more and in the public mind a lot more. That what you guys are all concerned about is it's a bunch of insiders doing this here. And, but the public does have time now, right? So, Sandy, how much more time do they have, and what should they be doing?
They should review the maps, they should submit their own maps, and testify, because the public hearings will be in the evening, 5 or 6, and will be on Zoom, so people will have time.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, all of our guests. And I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, as well as our guest, Natalia Hussey-Burdick from the Honolulu Reapportionment Commission, Sandy Ma, the Executive Director of Common Cause Hawaii, Steve Pavao from the Hawaii Island Advisory Council to the State Reapportionment Commission, and Colin Moore, Associate Professor and the Director of the Public Policy Center at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Next week on Insights, we will explore the stress and mental health issues people face as we head into another holiday season dealing with COVID-19. Please join us then. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.